All right, in this video, we want to accomplish two things. We want to look at an overview of how proteins get formed, and I want to go ahead and review RNA and the differences between RNA and DNA. So before we talk about this, let's make sure we understand where we're at in a cell. I'm going to draw a big black line here. I'm going to draw little lines here. So up above this line, this is the nucleus. This is going to be the cytoplasm. So that means that this line has to be the nuclear membrane. Nuclear membrane. And there are holes in the nuclear membrane called pores. So this opening represents a nuclear pore. I think it's air when you change it to nuclear, but hope that spelling is right. So if you remember, DNA is, of course, found in the nucleus. Well, here's the thing. DNA cannot get through nuclear pores. Protein synthesis, what we have out here, so this is protein synthesis. Takes place in the cytoplasm. So somehow you have to get this information off of the DNA out to the cytoplasm in order to build the protein. And here's a ribosome. Let's give ourselves a ribosome. Because we said in the last video, that's where protein synthesis takes place. And this is the protein that's forming down here. So the way that we do that is we use RNA. The job of RNA is to, we actually have three kinds of RNA. So we have mRNA, we have tRNA, and this stands for messenger RNA. We have transfer RNA. And there's a third one we're really not going to talk about called rRNA, and that stands for ribosomal RNA. But these are the two that we're going to talk about the most, are mRNA and tRNA. And so to get this information from the gene out to the ribosome, we use, this would be a strand of mRNA. And I'm going to put mRNA over here next to this. We call this process transcription, where we synthesize an mRNA copy of a section of DNA and we send it out to the cytoplasm. So let's add and send out to the cytoplasm. So once the mRNA gets out here, it goes to a ribosome and it bonds to a ribosome. And then the tRNA, the transfer RNA, in a process called translation, helps to build the protein. So transcription is used, again, to get that copy from the nucleus out to the cytoplasm. Translation is the actual building of the protein. So what we have here is we're actually building the protein. Building the protein. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down each of these in turn. We're going to talk about transcription, and then we're going to spend a couple of videos talking about translation. How do we actually build that? But before we go there, we have talked about the differences between RNA and DNA before. So let's see how much you remember. Let's do a little table here, DNA, and we'll do RNA. So pause the video and see how many differences you can remember. Okay, did you say that DNA has adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine? But RNA has, so DNA has adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. RNA has adenine, guanine, cytosine, but instead of thymine, it has uracil, capital U. You can always tell right away if you're looking at DNA or RNA, because if it has uracil, it's RNA. If you have thymine, it's DNA. Another difference is DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. The sugar in DNA is deoxyribose. The sugar in RNA is just ribose sugar. And that's where it gets the name RNA. It says deoxyribose sugar. The other thing then is the structure. DNA is a double strand in a double helix. But RNA is always a single strand. Single strand. So those are some of the big differences. If there's any others, we'll touch on them later. So what are our takeaways here? What we wanted to do is we wanted to introduce the overall process by which we're going to build a protein. And what we said the first step is transcription. We have to get the DNA out of the nucleus. We use messenger RNA and we do a process called transcription. It goes out through the nuclear membrane via a nuclear pore. Then once we're out in the cytoplasm, the mRNA finds a ribosome and it attaches to the ribosome. And then we do this process called translation using tRNA, where we build the protein. And then to close, we wrapped up some of the differences between DNA and RNA. So our next video is going to be over transcription. How do we get that DNA out of the nucleus? So stand by for that coming up next.